A werewolf shifter romance written by Catherine Stewart. Prologue. The air in the old chamber hung thick, heavy, like a shroud spun from dust and forgotten time. You could taste the grit on your tongue, smell the decay of ages clinging to the cold, damp stones. Moonlight, thin and sharp as a sliver of new forged silver, pierced through a high, arrow-slit window. And then, that beam cut across the swirling motes of dust, painting a stark, lonely spotlight on the stone floor. Beneath it, a woman's hand. Trembling. Desperate. Worked with frantic haste. Her knuckles were white, a stark contrast to the dirt smudging her skin. Around one slender finger, a unique silver ring, fashioned into a delicate crescent moon, caught the fleeting light, winking like a conspirator's eye. She pried at a loose floor stone, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps that echoed just a little too loudly in the oppressive silence. Each scrape of stone on stone felt like thunder in her own ears. What she was doing, you see, was burying a secret. A desperate hope wrapped in dark, intricately carved wood. Deep down, she knew the truth, had known it for weeks, a cold dread coiling in her belly. They were coming. And because of that, this tiny box, no bigger than her two hands cupped together, had to vanish. Had to become another whisper in this forgotten place. She didn't know what scared her more, their arrival, or the thought of this precious thing falling into the wrong hands. The wood of the box felt strangely warm beneath her chilled fingers, a living pulse against the dead stone. Inside? A legacy. A future. A dangerous, incandescent truth. She finally worked the heavy flagstone free, the effort making her shoulders ache, her lungs burn. Moments later, the box was nestled into the shallow, earthy hollow beneath. She started to push the stone back, her movements jerky, her nerves screaming. Almost there. Just a little longer. Looking back, perhaps she should have been quicker, less careful about the noise. But how can you rush when the fate of everything you hold dear rests in your trembling hands? Without warning, a shadow fell across the moonlight. Thick. Absolute. Swallowing the pale beam whole. Her heart leaped, a frantic bird against the cage of her ribs. Before she could move, before she could even fully process the sudden darkness, a new scent filled the air, something predatory, cold, like winter frost mixed with the metallic tang of something ancient and powerful. It was the scent of the hunter. And she knew instantly she was the prey. The rhythmic thumping she'd vaguely registered before? It was her own blood. Roaring in her ears. Her body moved on instinct, whirling around even as the stone clicked fully into place. In that moment, framed in the narrow doorway, stood a figure. Or rather, the silhouette of one, because it seemed to drink the very shadows around it. Tall. Broad. And the eyes, oh, you wouldn't forget those eyes. They glowed, a pair of luminous, chilling orbs burning with an unnatural light. Like embers fanned in the deepest pit of a nightmare. They weren't human. No. Matter how hard she tried to tell herself otherwise, no human ever lived with such hunger. Such cold, terrifying intelligence. Her voice trembled, a lost thing in the sudden, awful stillness. What are you? But the words were barely a breath, swallowed by the thick, charged air. The figure didn't speak. It didn't need to. As if pulled by a string, it took one slow, deliberate step into the chamber. And then another. The space between them burned, a chasm of terror. Her chest ached with the need to scream, yet no sound came. She was frozen. A mouse before the serpent. The moment their eyes locked, truly locked, something inside her shattered. This was it. The end she'd fought so desperately to avoid. A beat later, just before the darkness claimed everything, a single, fierce thought blazed through her mind: he must never find it. He must never know. Her gaze flicked, almost imperceptibly, to the floor stone she just sealed. Some secrets, you understand, are buried in blood, watered by sacrifice. And they lie in wait. Always waiting, for the moon to call them home. What happens when such a secret is unearthed?
The scent hit him first, long before he laid eyes on any of them. An impossible, intoxicating storm of wild moonlight and shattered sorrow that clawed its way into his very soul. And his wolf, dormant and patient for 3 decades, reared up from the depths of him with a single, earth-shattering demand. Mine. Noah, alpha of the ShadowCreek Pack, stilled on the rise overlooking the processing clearing. The usual mid-morning reports from his beta, Marcus, turning to meaningless drones in his ears. He'd felt a strange restlessness all morning, a prickle under his skin like a coming storm. But this was different. This was a cataclysm. Alpha, is something amiss? Marcus, ever observant, paused his recitation of patrol strengths, his brow furrowing. Marcus was a good wolf, loyal as the day was long, but he couldn't feel what Noah was feeling now. No one could. Noah forced a slow breath, trying to school his features, to fight down the sudden, savage possessiveness that threatened to overwhelm 30 years of disciplined alpha control. No, nothing, Marcus. Continue. But his eyes, they were already scanning the small, bedraggled group of newcomers huddled by the welcome stream. Each one a potential asset, or a potential threat. His pack needed strength, needed unity, especially with the whispers of unease from the northern territories. He'd considered political pairings, advantageous alliances, because that's what an alpha did. He hadn't, for a single moment, allowed himself to truly hope for this, for a scent that felt like destiny itself wrapping around his heart and squeezing. It's just, he started, then trailed off, his gaze snagging on a slight figure at the edge of the group, head bowed, shoulders hunched. Her scent, a maelstrom of wild, untamed magic and a grief so profound it was a physical ache in his own chest, pulsed stronger from her. She smelled of moonlight and a coming tempest. "What in the blazes are you?" his wolf growled, a mixture of awe and an almost desperate hunger. And then, before he could stop it, the thought followed, clear as a wolf's howl on a winter night. She's broken. Marcus, bless his pragmatic heart, simply nodded. As I was saying, the eastern border showed some unusual tracks, possibly lone rogues, but nothing organized. Noah held up a hand. "We'll review it in the den, Marcus. Let's get this welcoming over with." He needed to see her up close. He needed to understand why the very air around her seemed to shimmer with a power she was so obviously, desperately, trying to contain. Because an alpha always faced things head-on, didn't he? Even when his own wolf was threatening to claw its way out and claim what it had already decided was theirs. This was more than just a new wolf arriving. This felt like fate knocking, no, pounding, on his door. And he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to answer. Not when the scent of her promised both heaven and a whole world of trouble. You know that feeling? When every instinct you have screams at you, yet you can't help but lean into the storm. That was Noah. Right then, as he descended towards the clearing, his alpha aura settling over the assembled wolves like a familiar, heavy cloak, his gaze was a magnet, drawn inexorably to her. She kept her face hidden, a curtain of dark, lank hair obscuring her features, but he could feel the tremors running through her slight frame. Fear, old fear, ingrained deep. And something else, a wildness that matched the thrumming in his own blood. The other newcomers, a motley collection of omegas seeking refuge, a few displaced yearlings, they barely registered. They were background noise to the silent roar she evoked in him. His wolf paced within him, impatient, a restless predator. Closer. We must be closer. He stopped before the line of them, his traditional alpha greeting a well-worn script. Welcome to ShadowCreek. Here, loyalty is rewarded and treachery is dealt with. His voice was firm, unwavering, the voice of a leader who'd seen his share of both. Yet, as his eyes swept over her, he felt an uncharacteristic tremor. He could almost taste her magic, a raw, silvery essence that reminded him of the oldest tales, the ones about the first wolves, the moon-kissed ones. It was intoxicating and utterly terrifying, because power like that, untamed, was a wildfire waiting for a spark. He addressed her directly, his voice perhaps a shade softer than he intended. Your name and your former pack? For a long moment, she didn't move, didn't speak. The silence stretched, taut and humming. Then, slowly, she lifted her head. And Noah, alpha of ShadowCreek, felt the world tilt on its axis. Her eyes, wide and haunted, were the color of a forest pool shrouded in mist, shadowed by a pain so profound it stole his breath. But beneath the sorrow, beneath the fear, a spark, a flicker of defiance, a wild, untamed spirit that called to the deepest, most ancient part of him. Looking back, he should have known that first glance was a binding, more potent than any pack law. Sage, she whispered, her voice raspy, like autumn leaves skittering over stone. I was from Hollow Ridge. Hollow Ridge, a pack decimated by sickness and rogue attacks a year prior. That explained the depth of her grief, the shadows that clung to her like a second skin. But it didn't explain the power. It didn't explain the scent of raw, untamed moonlight. Before he could delve deeper, before he could ask the 100 questions now burning on his tongue, a strange energy, sharp and cold, spiked from her direction. It wasn't aggressive, not exactly, but it was potent. A silent, desperate shield. What are you hiding, little wolf? The ceremony, the formal integration, was due to begin. He usually kept a certain distance, a formality befitting his station. But not today. No. Today, he needed to be closer. He needed to understand this pull, this sudden, fierce conviction that this fragile, broken newcomer held some vital piece of his future, of his pack's future. He gestured for the ceremony to commence, his heart, for the first time in years, thudding with an unnerving mix of dread and a wild, undeniable anticipation. He felt it, clear as day. This was a turning point. The integration ceremony was an ancient ritual, a weaving of new threads into the pack's tapestry. Each newcomer would approach, offer their submission, and he, as alpha, would formally accept them, binding them with his scent, his word, his magic. It was a duty he performed with grave solemnity. Today, however, solemnity warred with a fierce, almost painful curiosity. As each wolf came forward, he went through the motions, his gaze repeatedly drifting to Sage, who remained last in line, her head bowed once more, a statue carved from fear and secrets. His wolf was a restless storm beneath his skin. Hours. Soon, when it was her turn, the air around them seemed to crackle. He could feel the other pack members watching, sensing the shift in their alpha, the unusual focus. He beckoned her forward. Step into the circle, Sage of Hollow Ridge. She moved like a wraith, her feet barely seeming to touch the ground. As she entered the ritual circle, he felt it again, that flare of raw, untamed silver energy. More potent this time, like a star struggling to be born. It was beautiful, breathtakingly so, and utterly, terrifyingly, uncontrolled. He saw a few of the pack elders shift uneasily. Power like that, unharnessed, could be a danger to them all. More importantly, a danger to her. His alpha instincts, the need to protect, to control, to understand, surged through him. A tidal wave of duty and an emotion far more personal, far more primal. He made a split-second decision, one that went against years of measured leadership. He wouldn't just offer a distant acceptance. No, he needed to feel that power, to gauge its source, its intent. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them until he could see the frantic pulse at the base of her throat, smell the wild, sweet fear rolling off her in waves, mingled with that intoxicating scent of moonlight. "There is an old rite," he announced, his voice deeper now, resonating with the ancient magic stirring within him, and, he sensed, within her, a rite of true binding, for those the moon herself has touched it. He hadn't planned to say it, hadn't even known such a rite existed until the words were leaving his lips, drawn from some forgotten well of ancestral memory. He reached out, his hand moving as if guided by an unseen force. "Do not fear," he murmured, though whether it was for her or for himself, he couldn't be sure. He placed his hand gently on her arm. And then, the world exploded, not in sound, but in light, in sensation. A blinding, searing silver fire erupted from the point of their contact, roaring up his arm, straight into his heart, into his soul. He heard gasps from the assembled pack, felt the shockwave of ancient magic ripple through the clearing. His wolf howled in triumph, a primal cry of recognition that echoed in the core of his being. Mate, our mate. On his skin, on hers, a luminous, intricate mark blazed into existence, a silver crescent moon entwined with the proud silhouette of a wolf. His mark, her mark, their mark. For a breathless eternity, Noah could only stare, his mind reeling, his alpha senses overwhelmed. Joy, pure and fierce, warred with utter, dumbfounding shock. A fated mate. Here, now, this broken, terrified girl with the power of a nascent goddess thrumming beneath her skin. It was impossible. It was undeniable. It was everything. Then, her voice, raw with a despair so profound it was like a physical blow, shattered the spell. "This is a mistake," she choked out, yanking her arm away as if his touch had burned her, stumbling back, her eyes wide with a terror that cut him deeper than any blade. "I reject this. I reject you." Her words were a douse of icy water, a brutal counterpoint to the triumphant song of the mark now blazing on his own hand, a song his wolf still sang with unrestrained ferocity. He saw Kale, his ambitious second, his face a mask of stunned disbelief that was quickly morphing into something far more calculating. He saw the fear and confusion in the eyes of his pack. And he saw Sage, his fated mate, looking at him as if he were her executioner. The mark pulsed. A living thing. A beacon. "She rejects me," Noah thought, the words a cold, hollow echo against the inferno of the bond now roaring in his veins. His wolf snarled at her denial, but Noah, The Alpha felt a tremor of something akin to despair. But the great moon does not lie. What in the blazes have I unleashed upon us all? The fight for her heart, he knew with a sudden, bone-deep certainty, had just begun, and it promised to be the hardest battle of his life. Her "I reject you" echoed in the sudden, deathly hush of the clearing, each word a poisoned dart aimed straight at his soul. Yet the silver mark on her hand, blazed hotter, a defiant fire screaming liar. She is ours. And in that instant, Noah knew two wars had just been declared, one against whatever darkness lurked outside his borders, and a far more terrible, more delicate one for the heart of the terrified, furious woman who was now, irrevocably, his. His wolf, a primal beast of instinct and possession, snarled at her defiance, demanding he stride across the space separating them. Take her, mark her again with tooth and scent until she understood the finality of what the great moon had just ordained. But Noah, the Alpha, the leader of ShadowCreek for 10 hard-won years, saw the sheer, unadulterated terror in Sage's eyes the color of a storm-tossed sea, and the fragile thread of her sanity. Breaking her would gain him nothing but a shattered mate, and that, he found with a startling pang of something fiercely protective, was unthinkable. Around them, the pack was a sea of stunned faces, whispers starting to ripple like wind through dry leaves. He could feel Kale's ambitious gaze boring into his back, practically taste the wolf's sudden, opportunistic calculations. This was a disaster. This was a miracle. He had to take control, and fast. The ceremony, Noah announced, his voice deliberately calm, projecting an authority he suddenly felt was balanced on a knife's edge, is concluded. The moon has spoken. The bond is recognized. He let his gaze sweep over the pack, a silent warning against dissent, before it landed back on Sage. Her small chin was tilted in that stubborn, heartbreaking defiance, her slight frame trembling but unbowed. Looking back, I should have realized her spirit was as untamed as the magic thrumming within her. Perhaps that's what called to me so fiercely. He gestured to two of his most trusted guards, Liam and Thorn, their faces carefully neutral. Escort Luna Sage to the Elderwood cabin. See that she has whatever she requires. Luna Sage. The title felt foreign on his tongue, yet electrifyingly right. The cabin was secluded, comfortable, often used by honored guests. He hoped she'd see it as a refuge, not a prison. But the glare she shot him as Liam and Thorn gently flanked her, a look promising a war of attrition he wasn't entirely sure how to win without causing her more pain, suggested she saw only gilded bars. As she was led away, her parting glance was a raw wound. And just like that, the elation of finding his fated mate was T-boned by the crushing weight of her fear. This, he thought with a grimace, was going to be harder than any battle he'd ever fought. You know, sometimes you get exactly what you wished for, just not in any way you imagined. The moment Sage was out of sight, the clearing erupted, not in loud challenges, not yet, but in a flurry of urgent, hushed conversations. Marcus was instantly at his side. Noah, Alpha, this is unprecedented. The moon works in ways we don't always understand, Marcus, Noah replied, his voice still level, though inside, his emotions were a tangled mess. He felt the faint, persistent thrum of the bond, an invisible chain linking him to Sage. Right now, it vibrated with her acute distress, a thin, sharp wire of fear and anger that lanced directly into his own heart. It was distracting and deeply unsettling. How was he supposed to lead, to think, with her emotions bleeding into his? Cale chose that moment to approach, his usual confident smirk softened by a veneer of carefully constructed concern. Alpha, a word if I may. For the good of the pack, of course. Noah bit back a growl. Cale's ambition was a well-known quantity. This situation was prime feeding ground for it. Speak, Cale, but choose your words wisely. This female, Sage, Cale began, his eyes flicking towards the path Sage had taken. She's clearly unstable, untrained, and her public rejection of you, of a sacred bond, it breeds uncertainty, Alpha, weakness. She is frightened, Cale, and grieving. Noah countered, the protective urge flaring hot and fast. Her power is considerable, yes, but it is not a weakness to be feared, rather a strength to be understood. She is the pack's Luna now, by the moon's own decree. Deep down, he knew the truth of Cale's words regarding the pack's perception, but he'd be damned if he'd admit it to him. A Luna who rejects her Alpha? Cale pressed, a subtle challenge in his tone. Some are already whispering it's a bad omen, Alpha. That perhaps this bond isn't the blessing you claim. Enough, Noah snapped, his Alpha authority finally cracking through his forced composure. My bond with my mate is not a matter for pack debate. Your concern is noted, Cale. Now see to your duties. Cale inclined his head, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes before he retreated. But the seeds of dissent, Noah knew, had been sown. To make things worse, he felt a fresh wave of Sage's misery through the bond, so potent it almost buckled his knees. He needed her to be calm, not for his sake, but for hers, without thinking too much on it, because thinking brought doubt. He sought out Lyra, the pack's ancient, wise healer. Lyra, go to the Elderwood cabin. See to Luna's Sage. Ensure she is comfortable. Talk to her. He paused. Find out what troubles her so deeply beyond the obvious. He hated asking it. Hated the feeling he was already resorting to alpha tactics with the woman who should be his closest confidant. But what choice did he have? Her fear was a wall between them, and he didn't know any other way to even begin to find a door. Later that day, Noah tried to immerse himself in the mundane rhythm of pack leadership. He reviewed patrol reports with Marcus, the earlier mention of rogue tracks nagging at him. He settled a dispute between two hot-headed young shifters over hunting rights. He listened to the elders' concerns about dwindling winter stores. But through it all, there was Sage, a constant, pulsing awareness at the edge of his senses. He felt her restless pacing in the cabin, the ebb and flow of her fear, the sharp spikes of her anger, the desolate waves of her sorrow. It was like having a vital part of himself trapped in another room, suffering, and being utterly powerless to help. His wolf was no use either, offering only one unhelpful solution. Go to her. Claim her. Make her understand. Which was precisely what he couldn't do. Not if he wanted to earn her trust, not just her submission. Truth be told, he was frustrated. Frustrated by her rejection, by his inability to explain the sheer, earth-shattering miracle of what a fated bond meant. Did she not feel the pull, the rightness of it, beneath her terror? Or was her past trauma, the one that scented her so strongly with sorrow, too deep a wound for even fate to heal? He found himself walking the perimeter of the woods near the Elderwood cabin, drawn by that invisible chain. The lights within were dim. He saw her silhouette pass the window, a fleeting shadow of grace and despair. And in that moment, all his alpha certainty, all his carefully constructed control, wavered. He just wanted to go to her, to hold her, to tell her everything would be all right, even though he suspected it was a damn lie. Before he could give in to the impulse, she must have sensed him. Her silhouette froze at the window. Even from this distance, he felt the jolt of her awareness, followed swiftly by a fresh spike of fear that hit him like a physical blow. Their eyes met, a brief, searing connection across the moon-dappled clearing. Then, with a pained intake of breath he felt as keenly as if it were his own, she whirled away from the window, vanishing into the cabin's deeper shadows. He retreated, his heart a heavy stone in his chest. His wolf howled in frustration, a silent, desperate cry. Why does she run from us? He didn't have to wait long for the confrontation he both craved and dreaded. That night, as he was reviewing ancient texts in his den, searching for any lore, any precedent, for a mate so vehemently rejecting a fated bond, the door burst open. And there she was, Sage. Her eyes were blazing, two storm-tossed oceans in a pale, determined face. Her dark hair was a wild tangle around her shoulders, and she looked, he thought with a strange pang of admiration, like a cornered Valkyrie ready to do battle. You, she bit out, her voice trembling but surprisingly strong. You did this to me. Noah rose slowly, his own mark pulsing in response to her proximity, a warm, insistent thrum. Sage, he began, aiming for calm, for reason. What happened today was not of my deliberate making. It was the moon. It was fate. Fate. She laughed, a short, sharp, broken sound that held no humor, only pain. You call this brand, this chain a gift of fate? She held up her arm, the silver mark luminous against her skin. I call it a cage. I had a life, what little was left of it. I wanted peace. Not this. Her gesture encompassed him, the den, the entire pack. It is not a cage, Sage. It is a bond. The deepest, most sacred connection two souls can share. He tried to explain, stepping towards her, his hands held open, placating. Her wolf, he could sense, was a raging inferno beneath her skin, terrified and lashing out. Deep down, she knew the truth, or some part of it, didn't she? Why else would she fight it so hard if there wasn't something to fight against? Sacred, she recoiled as if he'd struck her. You forced this on me, in front of everyone. You think I don't know what they're saying? That I'm your property now. Her voice cracked on the last word. His own temper, usually so firmly leashed, began to fray. No one, he growled, his voice dropping, the alpha in him surfacing despite his best intentions, will ever consider you property. You are the Lunar of this pack, my mate. I am nothing to you, she cried, tears now streaming down her face, each one a fresh stab to his heart. I don't want your pack. I don't want your mark. I want you to undo it. Make it go away. He moved closer then, the space between them crackling with her distress and his own rising, desperate need to make her understand, to soothe her, to stop this tearing agony. Sage, listen to me. I cannot undo what the great moon has ordained. No one can. This mark, it is a part of us now. Of you. Of me. He reached for her, intending to gently take her arm, to show her their marks, to try and explain the resonance he felt. But as his fingers brushed her skin, as their argument reached a fever pitch of raw, exposed emotion, a sound ripped through the night, silencing them both. A howl. Not the familiar call of a pack wolf, but something other. Something ancient, chilling, and utterly unnatural, echoing from the depths of the forest that bordered their territory. It seemed to bypass the ears and go straight to the bones, a primal cry of desolation and hunger. Noah's head snapped up, every alpha instinct roaring to full alert. The hairs on his arms rose. He saw the color drain from Sage's face, her earlier defiance momentarily eclipsed by a stark, visceral terror that mirrored the sudden cold dread gripping his own heart. The sound, he realized with a sickening lurch, seemed to keen directly for her.
The sound ripped through the charged air of the Alpha's den, a howl so alien, so steeped in ancient ice and hunger, that it didn't just silence her furious words to Noah, it clawed into her very marrow. And a terrifying, instinctive certainty flooded Sage, that unholy cry, "It's for me." Her heart, already hammering from her confrontation with the Alpha who had branded her soul, seemed to stop, then restart with a painful, suffocating lurch. The air crackled. Suddenly colder. The scent of pine and old wolf from the den now overlaid with something else, something predatory and wrong. Before she could move, before the scream trapped in her throat could find release, Noah was no longer the man arguing with her, the reluctant captor of her unwilling fate. In the span of a breath, he was all Alpha. A wall of barely restrained power. His head snapped up. His eyes, those unsettling stormy gray eyes that saw too much, now fixed on something far beyond the confines of the room, something only he could truly sense. "Guards!" His voice was a whip crack. A command that brooked no argument. Sage heard the immediate thud of paws, the scrape of claws on stone from outside. "Secure the perimeter. Report any breaches. Now." She found herself trembling. Not from her earlier anger, but from a primal fear she hadn't felt since the night her parents died. That howl hadn't just been a sound, it felt like a summons, a dark promise whispered on a dying wind. What was that? She managed, her voice a thin, reedy thing she barely recognized. Noah's gaze flicked to her then. Sharp. Intense. For an instant, she saw not the possessive Alpha, but a protector, his focus absolute. "Trouble," he said, his voice a low growl. "And it sounds like it's looking for an invitation." He moved towards the door, then paused, looking back at her, his expression unreadable. "You will return to the Elderwood cabin. Thorn and Liam will escort you. You are not to leave it. For your own safety." Her safety? Or his pack's safety from her? The familiar resentment warred with the new, icy fear. "And if I refuse?" she challenged, though the words lacked their earlier fire. "What would you have done?" Trapped with a man who felt like her jailer, yet who now seemed like the only shield against a far greater darkness. A muscle ticked in his jaw. "This is not a request, Sage." And just like that, the Alpha was back, his authority a palpable force. Yet, beneath the command, her skin tingled from the strange, unwanted connection of their shared mark, and she felt a confusing, fleeting echo of his concern? Or was it just his wolf's instinct to guard its new, unwilling property? Before she could dissect the unwelcome sensation, Thorn and Liam were there. Their faces grim. Their presence a silent insistence. There was no real choice. Not now. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Back in the Elderwood cabin, the gilded cage felt more like a tomb. The hours that followed were a torment of listening, of waiting for that unholy howl to return, of feeling the pack's collective fear radiating through the very floorboards. Sleep, when it finally came, was no escape. It was a landscape of sharp teeth and glowing lunar eyes, of her parents' faces fading into shadow, of a silver mist that whispered her name in a voice that was both beautiful and terrifyingly cold. More than once, Sage jolted awake, her heart a frantic drum. Convinced that the mist from her dreams was coiling in the corners of the room, that a shadowy face with those same lunar eyes had watched her from the foot of her bed. Was she losing her mind? Or were the nightmares bleeding into her waking hours, a prelude to something worse? Looking back, I should have known the veil between worlds was thinner for me now, that the nightmares were not just dreams, but glimpses. Lyra, the old pack healer, visited again the next morning. Her eyes, ancient and knowing, seemed to see straight through Sage's attempts at composure. She brought warm broth and a poultice for a bruise Sage hadn't even realized she'd gotten. "The forest is unsettled, child," Lyra said, her voice a soft, creaky whisper as she stirred the fire. "Old things awaken when the moon is in turmoil." "What things?" Sage asked, her voice barely audible. She was trying so hard to be strong, to show no weakness, because weakness was what had always made her a target. Lyra just shook her head, a sad little smile playing on her lips. "Some things are best left undisturbed. But the Alpha, he feels the disturbance deeply. Especially now." She glanced at Sage's arm, where the mate mark lay hidden beneath her sleeve. "Such bonds are a beacon, child. They shine bright in the darkness, for good and for ill." Sage shivered, pulling her sleeve down further. A beacon. That's what she was. A target. And this bond she despised was painting her in glowing colors for whatever horrors lurked outside. "He shouldn't have done it," she whispered, more to herself than to Lyra. "Perhaps," Lyra conceded, her gaze gentle. "Or perhaps the moon knew something Alpha Noah did not. Sometimes, child, the greatest protections come in the most unwelcome of disguises." But Lyra's words, meant to soothe, only amplified Sage's sense of dread. What if this mark wasn't a mistake, but a destiny she was utterly unprepared to face? The days that followed crawled by, each one a fresh layer of isolation and simmering fear. She felt the pack's distress like a physical weight whenever she was forced to venture out for necessities. Whispers followed her, sharp and pointed. "The marked one. The Alpha's folly. She brought this darkness upon us." Kale, Noah's ambitious second, was often at the heart of these murmurings, his voice carrying, his words carefully chosen to sow doubt and fear. How could they not see that their fear was a weapon Kale wielded more skillfully than any claw? Sage thought bitterly. Driven by a desperate need to understand the chaotic power thrumming within her, the power that had flared so disastrously during the ceremony, Sage began to search for solitude. Far from the judging eyes of the pack, she found a secluded waterfall, its roar a welcome sound that drowned out the whispers in her own head. Here, hidden by a curtain of cascading water and ancient, moss-covered rocks, she tried to coax her power out, to understand its rhythm. It was like trying to tame a wild bird, one moment, nothing but a faint silver shimmer on her fingertips, the next, a surge of cold, lunar energy that made the very stones around her vibrate, making the wildflowers at her feet bloom and wither in the space of a breath. It responded to her emotions, flaring brightest when her fear or frustration peaked. "Control it, Sage," she'd muttered to herself, her voice tight. "You have to control it." Because if she couldn't, she was a danger to herself, and a weapon for others. One afternoon, as a sliver of moonlight pierced the canopy, igniting the spray from the waterfall into a rainbow of ethereal colors, she focused, drawing on that cool, distant light. A soft, silver glow enveloped her hands. It was beautiful. And terrifying. She felt it, clear as day, a hum, a song beneath her skin. Her wolf, usually a source of chaotic grief, seemed to settle, to purr in response to this lunar caress. Was this the key? The moon? Before she could explore further, a twig snapped behind her. Her head whipped around, her heart leaping into her throat. A large, dark wolf stood at the edge of the clearing, half hidden in the shadows, its eyes fixed on her with an unnerving intelligence. It wasn't a ShadowCreek wolf, its scent was alien, wilder. One of them? Her half-formed shield of silver light sputtered and died. The wolf just watched her for a long, breathless moment, then, as if it had seen all it needed, it melted back into the undergrowth, vanishing as silently as it had appeared. Her breath came out in a ragged sob. She was being hunted. And her sanctuary was no longer safe. That night, sleep was impossible. The encounter with the dark wolf, Lyra's cryptic warnings, the pack's hostility, it all churned within her. She felt an inexplicable, dreadful pull, a cold thread leading her out of the cabin, through the sleeping pack grounds, towards the eastern ridge where the unnatural howl had first been heard. It was foolish. Dangerous. She knew it. What would you have done, though? When every instinct screamed danger, but a deeper, darker curiosity pulled you forward? She found herself in a clearing. The trees stark and skeletal under a waning moon. And then she saw them. Carved into the earth, into the bark of an ancient oak, were symbols. Ritualistic. Disturbing. A crescent moon, crudely drawn, dripping with what looked horrifyingly like dried blood. A cold dread, sharper than any she'd yet felt, pierced her. This place, it reeked of dark magic, of something ancient and malevolent. Sage? She whirled. A cry caught in her throat. Noah stood at the edge of the clearing, his expression grim, his eyes scanning the area. He, too, had evidently been drawn here, or perhaps his alpha senses had led him to the source of the unease. The air between them was thick with unspoken things, with the memory of their argument, with the undeniable thrum of their unwanted bond. "What is this place?" she managed, her voice trembling. He didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the bloody crescent moon symbol. "The Lunar Ascendants," he said finally, his voice a low rumble. "A fanatical sect, long thought dead. They worship a darker aspect of the moon. They seek power through blood and sacrifice." He looked at her then, his eyes searching hers. "This symbol, have you seen it before?" Her blood ran cold. The nightmares. The shadowy face. The silver mist. As the truth unraveled, as the pieces clicked into a horrifying picture, she opened her mouth to tell him, to share the terror that was now a living thing inside her. But before the words left her lips, the forest around them exploded. Shadowy figures, moving with an unnatural, terrifying speed. Their eyes glowing with that same chilling lunar light she'd seen in her nightmares, burst from the trees. And they were coming straight for her. Noah reacted instantly. A furious roar tearing from his throat as he shoved her behind him. His body transforming, shifting, into the massive, powerful form of his wolf. "They know who I am," the thought screamed through Sage's mind, a raw, pure terror. "They know!"
The world narrowed to tooth and claw in the desperate, terrified scent of her as the shadowy bastards erupted from the trees. His shift was a lightning strike of agony and release. Bone and sinew reforming into a vessel of pure, alpha fury. And the only coherent thought that pierced the red haze was, protect Sage. At any cost. He'd thrown her behind him, a shield of muscle and rage, the growl ripping from his transformed throat a promise of death to any who dared touch her. These weren't ordinary rogues. They moved with an unnatural, fluid grace, their eyes glowing with that same chilling lunar light he'd seen flicker around Sage herself. Coincidence? He thought not. And that infuriated him even more. They reeked of dark, perverted moon magic. He met the first attacker with a roar, his claws tearing through shadowy flesh, his fangs finding purchase. They fought with a silent, unnerving coordination, their movements less like wolves and more like, well, something else entirely. Something crafted for stealth and murder. He was an alpha, one of fate's more powerful shifters. His strength legendary. His battle prowess honed over years of defending his territory. Yet these things, they were slippery. Fast. Two tried to flank him, to get to Sage, who he could feel trembling behind him, her fear a sharp, painful thrum against their new, still raw bond. No. His wolf, his very soul, screamed the denial. He spun, a whirlwind of fur and fury, taking down one with a brutal swipe that sent it tumbling back with a sickening crack. But the other, damn it, the other slipped past his guard. He whirled, a fresh snarl tearing from him. Expecting to see Sage, he didn't know what he expected. Her terror, her collapse. Instead, as the shadowy figure lunged for her, a brilliant, blinding shield of pure silver light erupted from Sage, throwing the attacker back as if it had hit a solid wall. The creature shrieked, a high, thin sound that grated on his heightened senses before scrambling away. Noah paused for the barest fraction of a second. Stunned. That light, it was her magic. Raw, potent, and utterly instinctive. A fierce, unexpected surge of pride, hot and wild, shot through him, quickly followed by an even fiercer determination. She wasn't just a victim here. She was a fighter, whether she knew it yet or not. Looking back, that was the first moment I saw the queen beneath the frightened Omega, and it took my breath away, even in the midst of battle. He renewed his assault with a vengeance, driving the remaining attackers back, their shadowy forms melting into the trees as swiftly as they'd appeared. But not before one, darting in low and fast, slashed at his exposed flank with a wickedly sharp, obsidian-like blade. Pain, cold and biting, seared through him. He roared, more in fury than agony. But they were gone, leaving only the scent of their dark magic and the unnatural chill of his wound. Back in the relative safety of his den, the chill in his flank was spreading, a deep, invasive cold that normal werewolf healing couldn't seem to touch. Lyra, her ancient face etched with worry, worked over him, her poultices and chants doing little to stem the creeping numbness. This is no ordinary wound. Alpha, she murmured, her voice grave. It is tainted with shadow magic, a perversion of the moon's true power. Noah gritted his teeth against a wave of icy pain. He could feel Sage hovering near the doorway of the den, her presence a confusing mix of fear, an odd sort of reluctant concern, and something else he couldn't quite name. It pulsed through their bond, a silent, hesitant question. He was the alpha. He shouldn't show weakness. Yet, this cold, it was seeping into his bones. She didn't know what scared her more, he thought, sensing her turmoil, my injury, or the fact that some part of her actually cared. Then, before Lyra could try another remedy, Sage stepped hesitantly into the den. Her eyes, those captivating stormy pools, were fixed on his wound. The light, she whispered, so low he almost didn't catch it. When I in the forest, it felt warm. Lyra looked from Sage to Noah, a knowing gleam in her ancient eyes. Perhaps, child, she said gently, some lights are meant to fight the shadows. Before Noah could speak, before he could even process what she meant, Sage moved closer. He felt the almost imperceptible shift in the air as her unique lunar energy focused. Her hand, small and trembling, reached out towards his wound. He tensed, his wolf bristling at the perceived vulnerability, yet some deeper instinct, some whisper of their undeniable bond, urged him to remain still. As her fingers, cool and surprisingly soft, brushed against the inflamed edges of the cut, a soft, silver light bloomed from her palm. It wasn't like the explosive shield in the forest. This was gentle, coaxing, like pure moonlight given form. And the cold, the bone-deep, unnatural chill in his wound, it receded. Just a fraction, but it was enough. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The relief was immediate, profound. Sage snatched her hand back as if burned, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fear at what she'd just done. But Noah had felt it. Her power. It wasn't just wild and defensive, it was healing. And it might be the only thing capable of truly countering this dark magic, which meant she was even more valuable, more of a target than he'd ever imagined, and somehow more intrinsically tied to his own survival. What would you have done, knowing your very life might depend on the powers of the one person who seemed to want nothing more than to escape you? His recovery, thanks to Sage's reluctant, intermittent applications of her strange lunar light, always administered under Lyra's watchful eye, and always leaving Sage pale and shaken, was quicker than it should have been. But the incident solidified a grim resolve in Noah. Her lack of control over that immense power was a danger to her, a danger to the pack, and a beacon to their enemies. He found her by the waterfall 2 days later, her small form dwarfed by the ancient stones, a faint silver aura flickering around her as she stared into the cascading water. "Sage," he said, his voice softer than he'd intended. She jumped, whirling around, her eyes wide and wary. "Alpha." The title was still a wall between them. "Your power," he began, choosing his words carefully, because he knew this would be a battle. "It's extraordinary, but it's untamed. You need to learn to control it." Her chin lifted. "And you're offering to teach me, I suppose, like a wild beast that needs breaking?" He sighed. "This was not going to be easy. I am offering to help you survive, Sage. Those creatures, the lunar ascendants, they were clearly targeting you. They recognized your power, even if you don't. If you cannot control it, defend yourself. You are vulnerable." And because of their bond, her vulnerability was his. "Not only that," he added, his voice firming, "but uncontrolled power of that magnitude is a threat to everyone around you. To this pack." Her eyes flashed. "So this is about protecting your pack, not me." "It is about both," he stated, stepping closer. "I will train you, starting tomorrow. Dawn." "And if I refuse?" she challenged, that familiar fire sparking in her gaze. It was a fire he was, much to his own confusion, starting to admire. "You won't," he said, his alpha authority settling around him, a weight she couldn't ignore, not entirely. "Because deep down, you know I'm right. You felt what they were, what they wanted. You don't want to be helpless again, do you?" He saw the flicker of remembered terror in her eyes and knew he'd struck a nerve, though he hated doing it. No matter how hard she tried to deny it, survival was a powerful motivator. The first training sessions were challenging. Sage was resistant, her fear making her power skittish and unpredictable. She was a whirlwind of frustrated sighs, accidental surges of energy, and muttered curses that would have made a seasoned warrior blush. He pushed her, harder than he wanted to, demanding focus, discipline. He taught her to draw on the ambient magic of the forest, to feel the pulse of the moon even in daylight. There were moments, brief and fleeting, when she would achieve a startling clarity, her silver light coalescing into shields, or lances of pure energy that made even his experienced senses hum with respect. And then, just as quickly, she'd lose it, dissolving into tears of frustration or dangerous flares of uncontrolled power. During one such session, he was demonstrating a defensive maneuver, explaining how to ground her energy. She was trying. He could see that, her brow furrowed in concentration, her small hands tracing patterns in the air. Focus, Sage. Feel the earth beneath you. Draw its strength, he urged, perhaps a little too sharply. Without warning, her eyes snapped open, wide and almost silver. A wave of raw, untamed lunar force erupted from her, a silent, concussive blast that slammed into him, sending him staggering back several feet, the air driven from his lungs. For a heart-stopping moment, the world tilted. He saw the sheer terror on her face as she realized what she'd done, the way her own power had clearly overwhelmed her. He also saw, in that unleashed torrent, a terrifying glimpse of its true, awe-inspiring potential. This wasn't just some minor gift. This was the power of storms, of tides, of the moon itself, condensed into one very small, very frightened wolf. His wolf, despite the shock, preened. Our mate is mighty. He, however, was merely trying to breathe. He recovered quickly, pushing down his own shock. Impressive, he managed, his voice a little rougher than usual. He saw her flinch, expecting anger, punishment. Instead, he walked towards her slowly. But uncontrolled power, Sage, is a weapon that can just as easily turn on the wielder. He saw a flicker of understanding, of dawning acceptance, in her eyes. Maybe, just maybe, they were making progress. That evening, he found her sitting on the ridge overlooking the valley, the same place he often went to think. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of blood orange and deep violet. He sat beside her, not too close, leaving her space. For a long time, they sat in silence, a comfortable quiet that was a stark contrast to their usual charged interactions. They call themselves the Lunar Ascendants, he said finally, his voice low. The lore is fragmented, mostly forgotten. They believe true power comes from a darker interpretation of the moon's cycle. They were thought to have been wiped out generations ago. She hugged her knees to her chest. Why do they want me? It was the question that had been haunting him. I don't know, Sage. But your power, it's akin to what the old tales describe of the first lunar matriarchs. Pure, potent. He paused. Perhaps they see you as a threat, or something to be controlled, used. The thought sent a fresh wave of protective fury through him. Before either could speak further, a young scout, breathless and pale, scrambled up the ridge. Alpha Noah. The Western Patrol, they've been taken. Noah was on his feet in an instant, his blood running cold. Taken? By whom? The Ascendants, Alpha. They left a message. The young wolf's hand trembled as he held out a tattered piece of hide, smeared with what looked horrifyingly like blood. Scrawled on it, in the same crude lettering they'd seen in the forest, was a single, chilling word, a word that made no sense, yet resonated with a terrifying, inexplicable familiarity when his gaze fell upon Sage. Sovereign. Noah stared at the word, then at Sage, whose face had gone deathly pale, her eyes wide with a dawning, uncomprehending terror. Sovereign. A cold dread, far deeper than the chill of his recent wound, gripped him. His mate, his terrifying, powerful, broken mate. What in the name of all the moons was a sovereign? And why did that title feel like a death sentence aimed directly at her heart?
Sovereign. The word wasn't just a sound, not from the scout's trembling lips, it was a brand. Invisible yet searing itself onto her very soul. A chilling, unwelcome echo of the mate mark Noah had pressed into her skin, the one that pulsed with a life of its own even now. And in the Alpha's suddenly guarded, intensely worried stormy gray eyes as they met hers across the ridge, Sage saw not just the reflection of her own stark terror, but the terrifying glint of a destiny she had never asked for. A destiny that apparently hunted her with bloody claws and whispered promises of annihilation. What in the name of all moons was a sovereign? And why did the title feel like a death sentence delivered just for her? The air grew colder. The vibrant hues of the sunset suddenly looking like blood smeared across the sky. Noah was all alpha then, his voice a low, urgent rumble as he dispatched orders. Organizing rescue parties for the kidnapped patrollers. Fortifying defenses. He moved with a focused intensity that was both frightening and, in a strange, unwelcome way, a little reassuring. But every so often, his gaze would snag on her, a complicated mix of something fiercely protective and deeply troubled. It made her skin crawl, that look. Because it told her, clearer than any words, that this new horror, this sovereign business, was inextricably tangled up with her. Looking back, I wonder if he already suspected more than he let on. Or was he just as lost in the sudden, violent storm as I was? Days blurred into a tense, nerve-shredding wait. The pack was on edge, shadows stretching long and menacing even in daylight. The kidnapped patrollers, there was no word. Sage felt their fear like a suffocating blanket, their whispered accusations following her like her own shadow. She was the ill omen. The harbinger of this new darkness. She tried to make herself small, to disappear, but the mark on her arm, the word sovereign echoing in her mind, made that impossible. One evening, Lyra, the old healer whose eyes seemed to hold the wisdom of ancient forests, found Sage huddled in the small, dusty alcove of the pack library, a place rarely visited. Some answers, child, Lyra had said, her voice like rustling leaves, are not found in the light of day, but in the whispers of those who came before. Her gaze had flicked to a shadowed, unassuming section of shelving, a section Sage hadn't even noticed before. Your mother, she spent many hours here. She, too, sought knowledge that was elusive. Before Sage could question her further, Lyra was gone, leaving behind only the scent of dried herbs and an unspoken invitation. With trembling hands, because what else could she do when the world itself seemed to be holding its breath around her, Sage approached the dusty shelves. Her fingers trailed over ancient, leather-bound tomes, until they brushed against a loose stone in the wall behind them, just as Lyra must have known they would. Behind it, wrapped in oilskin, was a slender, worn journal. Her mother's handwriting, elegant and familiar, covered the first page. A sob caught in Sage's throat. It felt like finding a ghost. She devoured the journal in the flickering candlelight of her cabin, the words a lifeline to a past she barely understood. Her mother wrote of lunar cycles, of the ebb and flow of unique, silver-tinged power, of a lineage stretching back to the very first moon called wolves. And then, the word, sovereign. It was a title. A birthright. A terrible responsibility passed down through a sacred bloodline. A lineage, her mother wrote, gifted with powers that could shape the very fabric of their world, healing light, elemental communion, whispers of prophecy. Sage's breath hitched when she read the description of a unique, crescent-shaped birthmark, faint as a silver tracing, found on all those of the true line. Her hand flew to her own shoulder, to the mark she'd always dismissed as a childhood scar. It was there. Just as her mother described. The room spun. No. It can't be. What would you have felt, to have your entire identity unravel with the turn of a page? She showed a particularly cryptic passage to Noah late one night, when he'd come to her cabin, his face etched with weariness from the fruitless search for his patrollers. It spoke of an alpha's strength being needed to shield a nascent moon. He frowned, his brow furrowed in concentration. This script, its ancient alpha lore, he'd murmured, his voice rough. It speaks of a time when alphas were sworn protectors of powerful lunar priestesses, or sovereigns. He looked at her then, a new, almost odd understanding in his eyes that made her want to scream. "Sage, what are you?" She didn't answer, couldn't. Instead, she turned back to the journal, her fingers tracing the elegant script. And then she found it. The betrayal. Her mother wrote of a brilliant student, Elara, gifted and beloved, who grew twisted by ambition. Elara craved the sovereign power for herself, believing she could usher in a new age of lunar dominance. She perverted the ancient teachings, delving into blood magic, into the shadowed aspects of their power. The name Elara, it was like a viper striking in Sage's memory. The shadowy figure from her nightmares. The cruel, beautiful face that sometimes shimmered in the silver mist in her room. It was her. All along, it was her. The next entries were fragmented. Panicked. Her mother wrote of hiding, of protecting her moonchild, Sage. She wrote of Elara's growing obsession, her ruthlessness. And then, the final, tear-blotted entry described Elara's ultimatum, her demand for certain sovereign artifacts her mother had sworn to protect. Artifacts that could amplify the sovereign power to a terrifying degree. The official story of her parents' death, a tragic rogue attack, had always felt wrong. Thin. Now, Sage knew why. It wasn't an accident. It was murder. Elara had hunted them down. Elara had destroyed her family. The grief was a tidal wave, so immense it threatened to drown her. But beneath the grief, something else stirred. A cold, hard fury. How couldn't I see it before? The signs, the whispers of my own blood trying to warn me? The confirmation of Elara's current hunt for her came with brutal swiftness. One of the kidnapped patrollers, a young wolf named Finn, was found near the border, barely alive, his body broken but his spirit, somehow, still flickering. Noah carried him back himself, his face a grim mask of fury. Lyra worked frantically, Sage hovering nearby, useless, her hands clenched. Finn's voice, when he finally spoke, was a hoarse, terrified whisper. "Elara, she leads them. She's beautiful, like a dark moon. And she kept asking about the false sovereign. She said the time of cleansing was near." His gaze found Sage, wide with a dawning, horrified recognition. She said the false sovereign would be brought to her, that the true lunar power would be hers. The blood drained from Sage's face. It wasn't just her lineage Elara wanted to extinguish, it was her very existence. And then, Finn gasped out one final, chilling detail before unconsciousness claimed him. "The Moonstone." Elara kept screaming about the Moonstone of Eldoria, said only the Sovereign could truly awaken it, and that your mother, she stole it from her. Sage's hand instinctively went to her throat, to the simple, milky white stone on a thin leather thong she'd worn since she was a child. Her mother had called it her whispering stone, a good luck charm. Now, it felt like a brand. Heavier than any iron. Pulsing with a faint, almost imperceptible thrum against her skin. It wasn't just a trinket. It was the Moonstone. And Elara wanted it. Elara would tear their world apart to get it. And to get her. The choice was no longer about running. The choice was about survival. And somehow, somewhere deep inside, a tiny, frightened ember of defiance began to glow.
The name Moonstone of Eldoria had barely left young Finn's dying lips when Noah saw it in Sage's eyes. A sudden, stark recognition that chilled him to the bone. The simple, milky white trinket she always wore around her slender neck. The one he'd often seen her unconsciously touch. The one he'd dismissed as a cherished memento of a lost mother, was now the glowing, terrifying epicenter of an ancient, bloody war. And his mate, his frightened, unwilling sovereign, was the key to unlocking a power that could either save them all or, just as easily, damn every last one of them. In that instant, the full, crushing weight of her unwanted destiny settled squarely onto his own alpha shoulders. It wasn't just her life on the line anymore. It was the Moonstone, her lineage, and, it seemed, the fate of anyone who stood with her. He watched Sage, saw the storm of emotions warring within her, the profound grief for her murdered parents, the stark terror of her unwanted heritage, but beneath it all, something new. A flicker, a tiny, stubborn ember of resolve starting to glow in the depths of those incredible, storm-gray eyes. His wolf, ever attuned to her, felt it too, a subtle shift in the frantic rhythm of her fear through their bond. She was still terrified, yes, who wouldn't be, but she wasn't breaking. Not yet. And the fierce, possessive pride that surged through him was so potent it almost made him dizzy. "My mate," his wolf crooned. "She has the heart of a true she-wolf, a queen even if she doesn't know it yet." He wanted to pull her into his arms, to shield her from the horrors Alara and this destiny promised, to whisper that he would face it all for her. But he knew, with a certainty that ached, that this was her path to walk, her power to claim. He could only walk beside her, be her shield, her anchor. "The Moonstone," he said, his voice low, trying to keep the gravity from crushing her. "Your mother, she entrusted it to you, Sage. She must have known, somehow, that you would need it." Before Sage could respond, her eyes still wide with the enormity of it all, Lyra, the old pack healer, materialized beside them as silently as the forest mist. In her gnarled hands, she held a small, intricately carved wooden box, the very same one Noah had seen in Sage's troubled visions, the one her mother had hidden with her dying breaths. "Your mother, Alina, the true sovereign before you," Lyra said, her ancient voice soft but carrying an undeniable weight, her gaze fixed on Sage. "She entrusted this to me, to give to her daughter when the shadow of Alara fell heaviest upon our lands." Lyra's eyes then met Noah's, a silent acknowledgement of the terrible burden now shared. "The time, I fear, is now, little moon." With that, she pressed the box into Sage's trembling hands. What new secrets, what further burdens, or perhaps, what sliver of hope, did this final legacy hold? You could almost hear the fates themselves holding their breath. Sage opened the box with hesitant fingers. Noah stood close, a silent bastion, feeling the tremor that ran through her as she lifted the contents. There were a few small, personal trinkets, a pressed night bloom, a tiny, carved wolf no bigger than her thumb, tokens of a mother's love that made Sage's breath catch in a soft sob. And then a letter, sealed with a crescent moon pressed into wax, and nestled beneath it, an amulet. It wasn't the simple stone Sage wore. This one was larger, a disk of polished moonstone set in ancient silver, etched with symbols that seemed to shift and glow faintly in the dim light of the den. It pulsed with a quiet, immense power that Noah could feel vibrating against his own alpha senses. The moonstone of Eldoria, he knew without a doubt. This was it. "Read the letter, Sage," he urged gently, his hand instinctively going to her shoulder. A brief, reassuring squeeze. Her voice was barely a whisper as she read snippets aloud, her mother's words bridging the gap of years of death. "My dearest Sage, my moonchild, if you read this, then the shadows have found you, as I always feared they might. Alara, she covets what she cannot understand, a power meant for balance, not domination. The sovereign blood within you is a gift, little one, not a curse. Learn its rhythms. Listen to the moon's true song. It grants healing, communion with the elements, and a light that can banish even the deepest darkness. Alara's strength lies in fear, in twisting the moon's reflection, but her greatest weakness is her belief that love holds no power." Sage looked up then, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, but that ember of resolve within them burned a little brighter. Her mother had left her not just a legacy of danger, but tools. A weapon. Hope. "She knew," Sage whispered, her fingers tracing the symbols on the amulet. "She knew Alara would come for me. And she prepared you," Noah affirmed, his heart aching for her loss, yet swelling with admiration for the strength of the woman who had borne her. But the letter also spoke of the immense control needed, of the dangers of wielding such power before one was truly ready. Could Sage master it in time, with Alara already at their doorstep? The thought was a cold knot in his gut. The pack, however, was not so easily swayed by legacies and ancient prophecies. Fear was a potent poison, and Kale, Noah's ambitious, resentful second, was all too willing to be its apothecary. With Finn's terrifying testimony about Alara's power and her specific hunt for Sage, panic had begun to ripple through ShadowCreek. Kale fanned those flames expertly. "She's a magnet for this darkness." Noah overheard Kale telling a group of younger warriors near the training grounds. "The Alpha is blinded by this fated bond with an unstable witch. How many more of our pack must be sacrificed for her?" Before Noah could intervene, his presence a thundercloud of warning. The very air thrummed with an unnatural power. And then Alara's voice, magically amplified, cold and clear as winter ice, echoed through the entire valley, chilling every wolf to the bone. "People of ShadowCreek, your Alpha harbors a false sovereign, a thief who possesses what is mine. Surrender, Sage, and the moonstone of Eldoria she clutches by the light of the coming full moon. 3 nights from now, and your pack will be spared. Defy me, and I will grind your bones to dust and salt your earth with your own blood." The silence that followed was more terrifying than any howl. Then chaos. Pack members cried out in fear, some looking to Noah for reassurance. Others looked at Sage with open accusation. Kale stepped forward then, his face a mask of false concern. "Alpha Noah, surely you see now. We cannot fight such power. For the good of the pack, we must consider her terms." Noah's growl was a promise of violence. "We do not negotiate with terrorists, Kale. We do not surrender our own." He met the fear in his pack's eyes with a glare of pure alpha dominance. "Alara wants a war? Then by the moon, we will give her one." But even as he spoke, he felt a subtle, sickening shift in the pack's undercurrents. Kale had planted his seeds well. And how do you fight an enemy when some of your own are already looking for a way to appease her? Later that night, Marcus reported that one of Kale's closest cronies, a wolf named Silas, had been seen trying to send a message bird beyond their borders. The treachery, it seemed, was already beginning to bloom. The next 2 days were a blur of frantic preparations. The full moon, Alara's deadline, loomed. Scouts reported her forces gathering, a grotesque alliance of fanatical shifters loyal to her dark lunar creed and twisted, shadowy creatures of the forest, their eyes glowing with an unnatural luminescence. Barricades were erected. Warriors sharpened their claws and their resolve. Through it all, Noah watched Sage. She wasn't the cowering girl anymore. The fear was still there, a constant shadow in her eyes, but now it was overlaid with a grim determination. She moved among the pack, the true moonstone amulet a quiet reassurance around her neck. She spoke with the healers, her innate sensitivity to lunar energies, however raw, offering small insights. She even pointed out a weakness in their western flank defenses that Noah himself had overlooked, her burgeoning sovereign senses apparently more attuned to the land than he'd realized. He saw the other wolves watching her too, some with continued suspicion, but others with a dawning respect. A flicker of hope. The night before the full moon, he found her standing on the ridge where they had first sat in something approaching peace, the moonstone amulet glowing faintly in the twilight. "They're coming, aren't they?" she said, her voice quiet, devoid of its earlier terror, replaced by a heavy acceptance. "Yes," Noah said, standing beside her, their shoulders almost touching. He could feel the power thrumming from the amulet and from her. A dangerous, beautiful symphony. But we'll be ready. She turned to him then, her storm-gray eyes searching his. "Noah, if something happens, if I can't." He covered her hand with his, their marks pulsing in unison. "You can, Sage. Your mother believed in you. I believe in you." And in that moment, looking into her eyes, seeing the queen that was slowly, painfully awakening within the heart of the storm, he knew he wasn't just speaking as her alpha, or even as her fated mate. He was speaking as a man who had finally found someone, worth fighting all the hells of the world for. The battle horns, Alara's signal, blared from the forest just as the full moon crested the horizon, bathing the valley in its cold, silver light. The first wave of shadowy creatures and fanatical shifters crashed against their barricades like a nightmare made real. Noah roared, shifting, leading the charge, his pack a wave of fur and fury behind him. He fought with the strength of 10, his eyes constantly seeking Sage, who stood near the command post, her own silver light starting to gather around her. And then, amidst the chaos, the blood, the screams, he saw it. Kale, not fighting, not defending, but moving stealthily towards a section of the palisade that guarded their most vulnerable flank, his eyes fixed on Alara's advancing banner. The bastard, the traitor. Noah's roar of pure, unadulterated rage was lost in the din of battle, but his intent was clear. The enemy without was terrible, but the enemy within, that was a wound that could cripple them all.
The battle was a roaring, blood-soaked nightmare. A canvas of shifting shadows and desperate, snarling courage. But through the chaos, Sage saw it all with a terrible, chilling clarity. Kale. His face a mask of sneering treachery. Turning against his own alpha, against Noah, in the very heat of their desperate stand. And Noah, oh, gods, Noah, he was a magnificent, terrible engine of righteous fury. His wolf form a dark tempest of muscle and fang, charging to meet the betrayer head-on. In that horrifying instant, as a fear so profound it threatened to steal her breath, warred with a white-hot rage at Kale's duplicity, something ancient and fiercely protective ignited in Sage's own blood. A power that screamed it would not, could not, let Noah fall. Her mother's warnings, her mother's love, it all coalesced into a single, burning imperative: fight. She watched, her heart slamming against her ribs like a trapped bird, as Noah and Kale clashed, a brutal, personal war waged amidst the larger invasion. The sickening thud of their bodies colliding. The snarls that were more than just animalistic rage, they were accusations. They were heartbreak. Around them, Alara's forces, those shadowy, lunar-perverted shifters and the grotesque creatures they commanded, pressed their advantage, sensing the division in the ShadowCreek ranks. Looking back, the true horror wasn't just the external enemy, but the rot that had festered within. How could one wolf betray his own so completely? Sage felt a surge of her own lunar energy, cold and silver, rise within her. She couldn't intervene directly in Noah's fight, that was alpha business, sacred and terrible, but she could protect his flanks. With a choked cry, she thrust her hands out, and a shield of shimmering moonlight flared to life, deflecting a volley of dark energy bolts aimed at Noah's exposed back. He didn't see it, too consumed by Kale, but Sage felt a grim satisfaction. She was no warrior, not yet, but she was his mate. His sovereign. And she would not stand idly by. Kale, finally, went down. Not dead, but broken. Disarmed. Noah stood over him, his chest heaving, a low growl of ultimate judgment rumbling in his throat. Then, with a final, contemptuous snarl, Noah turned his back on the traitor, his attention snapping back to the greater threat. But as Kale scrambled away into the chaos, he screamed a parting curse, his voice laced with venom, "She'll be your undoing, Alpha. That moon witch will doom us all." Just as his words faded, a new, more terrifying presence swept onto the battlefield. Ilara. She moved like a dark goddess, radiating an aura of chilling power. Her silver eyes burning with fanaticism. Where she walked, shadows deepened, and the very air seemed to curdle. Pack warriors, brave and true, fell before her onslaught of dark lunar magic. Their cries cut short. The tide of the battle, which had seemed to briefly turn, now threatened to become a bloodbath. Sage knew, with a certainty that settled cold and hard in her belly, that this was her moment. Her mother's journal, the moonstone amulet pulsing warmly against her skin. Noah's belief in her, it all converged. She couldn't let fear rule her. Not anymore. No matter how hard she tried to hide, destiny, it seemed, had a way of finding you, didn't it? Taking a deep, steadying breath, Sage stepped out from behind the command post's meager cover. Ilara. Her voice, amplified by a surge of her own nascent power, cut through the din of battle. Surprisingly strong. Surprisingly steady. Ilara paused in her destructive advance, her head tilting, a cruel, beautiful smile gracing her lips. Ah, the little shadow. The false sovereign. Come to offer yourself, have you? To save these, lesser wolves? They are my pack, Sage declared, her chin lifting, the moonstone amulet blazing with a brilliant, pure silver light that pushed back against Ilara's encroaching darkness. And you will not harm them further. She drew on the knowledge from her mother's letter, picturing the moon's true, balancing light, not the twisted reflection Ilara wielded. Silver energy, cool and clean, flowed from her, forming a shimmering dome over a group of wounded warriors, shielding them from a hail of shadowy bolts. Ilara laughed, a sound like shattering ice. You play with baubles, child, while I command the true abyss. Your pathetic light is no match for the glory of the coming age. With a shriek, Ilara unleashed a torrent of violet-black energy, a swirling vortex of corrupted moonlight aimed directly at Sage. Sage stood her ground. Her heart pounding. but her resolve firming. She remembered her mother's words, her strength lies in fear, in twisting the moon's reflection. Sage wouldn't meet darkness with darkness. She focused, pouring all her will, all her desperate hope, into the moonstone. It blazed, and a shield of pure, unwavering silver met Alara's attack, deflecting it, shattering the dark energy into harmless sparks. A gasp went through the ShadowCreek warriors. Alara's smile faltered, replaced by a snarl of enraged disbelief. The duel was joined. It was terrifying. Alara's attacks were relentless, sophisticated, born of years of practice and dark ritual. Sage's were rawer, more instinctual, but fueled by a desperate love for her pack, for Noah, and by the pure, untainted magic of her lineage. She felt Noah fighting nearby, a reassuring presence, his roars a counterpoint to her focused silence as she wove her defenses and retaliated with bursts of cleansing light. Then, she saw it, Alara, momentarily overextended after a particularly vicious attack, left a small opening. Noah, ever the alpha, ever the protector, saw it too. He launched himself at Alara, a dark streak of righteous fury. But Alara was too quick. Too cunning. One of her elite, shadow-cloaked guards materialized from nowhere, intercepting Noah's charge with a black, obsidian-like blade that bit deep into his side. Noah roared, a sound of pure agony that ripped through Sage's soul. And he fell, his magnificent wolf form faltering. Noah! Sage screamed, her concentration shattering, her shield flickering. The sight of him injured, vulnerable, because of her, because he was trying to protect her, was more devastating than any magical attack Alara could conjure. Alara laughed, a triumphant, cruel sound. You see, little sovereign? Love is weakness. Now you will watch him die, and then you will give me what is mine. She raised her hand, dark energy coalescing, preparing to strike Noah down. Something inside Sage snapped. The fear, the doubt, the years of grief and loneliness, it all combusted, transformed by a love so fierce, so absolute. It was a physical force. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, love holds power Alara cannot comprehend. With a cry that was part roar, part sob, part incandescent vow, Sage threw her arms wide. The moonstone of Eldoria exploding with light, not just silver now, but shot through with golds and blues. The full spectrum of the moon's benevolent power. It wasn't an attack, it was an unmaking. A wave of pure, unconditional lunar truth washed over the battlefield. Alara's dark enchantments shattered like brittle glass. Her shadowy creatures recoiled, some dissolving into nothingness. Her fanatical followers cried out as the illusions and hatred fueling them were stripped away, leaving them dazed and confused. Alara herself screamed, a raw sound of agony and disbelief, as the pure light seared her corrupted magic, her borrowed power unraveling, leaving her exposed, diminished, kneeling in the dirt. Sage didn't wait. She rushed to Noah's side, the same brilliant, loving light pouring from her hands onto his grievous wound, coaxing flesh to knit, blood to staunch, his pained whimpers softening into steady breaths. "I've got you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, mingling with the light. "I'll always have you." Alara, defeated, disarmed by a power she had never truly understood, was quickly surrounded by what remained of Noah's furious warriors. Sage stood over her, exhausted but upright, Noah stirring beside her, his eyes already finding hers with dazed, grateful love. "Your shadows," Sage said, her voice trembling but clear, "are banished from this land, Alara." Victory. It was a fragile, blood-soaked thing. But as the pack elders moved to secure the fallen dark sorceress, a last, desperate shriek pierced the sudden quiet. For the true queen of the night. Four of Alera's most fanatical guards, unnoticed in the final conflagration, launched themselves from the shadows. Their eyes burning with suicidal fervor. Their claws aimed not at the defeated Alera, but straight at Sage. At her exposed back. As she knelt beside her still healing Alpha. Their dying screams, for the true queen, ripped through Sage's exhausted relief. A jagged, horrifying sound in the sudden lull of battle. She whirled. Her body screaming in protest. Her half-healed Alpha, her Noah, stumbling yet already trying to position himself before her, even as his own lifeblood still stained the ravaged earth. Four of Alera's most devoted fanatics, lunatics with eyes blazing with suicidal hate, were charging. Claws outstretched. Not for conquest, not anymore, but for a final, bloody act of vengeance aimed straight at her heart. At the future Alera had been denied. No, a voice screamed in her soul, raw and fierce, a voice that was finally, unequivocally her own. After all this, after clawing our way back from the abyss, I will not let them take him, or this fragile, blood-won peace. Before Sage could even fully draw on the dregs of her sovereign power, before Noah could fully interpose his weakened body, a blur of motion erupted from the ranks of the exhausted ShadowCreek warriors. Liam and Thorn, Noah's loyal guards, along with a handful of others whose kin had fallen to Alera's cruelty, met the fanatics in a clash of desperate, grieving fury. It was brutal. It was swift. There was no glory in it, only the grim necessity of ending the last vestiges of a nightmare. And then, silence. A profound, echoing silence broken only by the ragged gasps of the living, the soft whimpers of the wounded, and the distant, mournful sigh of the wind through the blood-soaked trees. Alera, stripped of her power and her followers, was a broken, snarling heap, quickly and efficiently bound by the pack elders. It was over. Truly over. Sage swayed, the adrenaline that had held her upright for so long suddenly deserting her, leaving her boneless. Noah was there, his arm, strong despite his own injuries, wrapping around her waist, holding her steady. They leaned into each other, two battered survivors amidst the devastation, the scent of blood and ozone and spent magic thick in the air. His skin was hot against hers, his breath ragged in her ear. He just held her, and she clung to him, the moonstone amulet pressing warm between them. As the first, tentative rays of dawn painted the bruised eastern sky in hues of hesitant rose and gold, they simply stood. Two souls who had walked through fire and somehow, impossibly, found each other on the other side. Looking back, that sunrise, it wasn't just the end of a long night. It was the promise of a morning we both thought we might never see. He didn't speak, just pressed a trembling kiss to her hair, and in that simple gesture, Sage felt a universe of emotions, relief, grief, an exhausted, terrifying hope. Weeks later, the physical scars of that terrible battle had begun to fade. The earth was slowly drinking the blood, the scent of pine gradually overcoming the metallic tang of war. But the emotional landscape, well, that was a different matter. ShadowCreek was rebuilding, not just its defenses, but its spirit. And Sage found herself, much to her own surprise, at the heart of it. Noah, his own recovery steady and sure, thanks in no small part to the quiet, healing light she now tentatively wielded, included her in everything. She sat beside him in counsel, her voice, initially hesitant, growing stronger as she offered insights, her sovereign intuition, her innate understanding of the balance her mother had written about, proving surprisingly astute. When the time came to decide Alera's fate, and that of her remaining, captured descendants, Noah turned to her. "What does our sovereign, our Luna, decree?" he'd asked, his stormy gray eyes soft with a trust that both terrified and empowered her. Sage had looked at Alera, a creature now consumed by her own bitter hatred, powerless but still venomous. "Imprisonment," Sage declared, her voice clear and unwavering, echoing in the hushed clearing. "Magically bound, where her twisted view of the moon can harm no one ever again." For the others, the ones Lyra's gentle probing had revealed were more misled than malevolent. She offered a path, a chance at redemption, to learn the true balance, to serve a community instead of a tyrant. But they will earn their place. Even Kale, when he was dragged back from his cowardly flight, faced her quiet judgment. Exile, she'd said, meeting his sullen, hateful gaze. Go, Kale. Find a new path. Perhaps, one day, you will find your honor again. Noah had simply nodded his approval, his pride in her a warm, steady presence at her side. And the pack had watched, and listened. And slowly, the suspicion in their eyes began to be replaced by something else. Respect. Maybe even acceptance. It's a strange thing, isn't it, she mused one evening, to find your strength not in fighting what you are, but in finally, embracing it. Who would have thought? One cool evening, when the scent of autumn was just beginning to tinge the air and the first stars pricked the twilight sky, Noah took her hand. He didn't speak, just led her away from the bustling heart of the recovering pack, through the whispering trees, to the secluded waterfall where she had first, fearfully, tried to touch her own power. The place felt different now. Cleansed. Peaceful. The moonlight, full and benevolent tonight, danced on the cascading water, turning it into a curtain of liquid silver. He turned to her then, his hands gently taking both of hers, his gaze so full of love it made her breath catch. Sage, he began, his voice a low, warm rumble that vibrated right through her. When the moon first marked us, I was an alpha reacting to fate, to a bond one didn't understand, only that it was mine. And you, his thumb stroked the back of her hand, sending shivers up her arm, you were terrified, and rightly so. I was a force, a demand, not a partner. Her heart ached with a sweet, poignant sorrow for the fear he had unknowingly caused her, a fear that was now, blessedly, almost a memory. Noah. He shook his head gently. Let me say this. What I feel for you now, Sage, it has little to do with that fated mark, though I will forever thank the moon for bringing you into my life. This, he squeezed her hands, his eyes earnest, this is for you. For the courage I've seen in you, for the compassion you've shown, for the fire in your spirit that even Alara couldn't extinguish. For the woman who stood against the darkness, not just for herself, but for all of us. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. Not a grand jewel, but a simple, intricately woven band of silverwood, a tree that grew only in the heart of ShadowCreek, its pale wood said to glow faintly under the true moon. This isn't a symbol of fate, Sage. It's a symbol of choice. My choice. I choose you, Sage. Not as my fated Luna, not as the sovereign, but as the woman who holds my heart, my soul, my everything. Will you choose me? Tears welled, blurring the moonlight, blurring his beloved face. This was no alpha command, no fated decree. This was Noah. Offering her his heart, freely, completely. And hers answered without hesitation. Yes. She whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Oh, Noah, yes. Always, yes. He slid the simple band onto her finger, and it felt more precious, more binding, than any alpha's mark. As he drew her into his arms, their lips meeting in a kiss that was both a promise and a homecoming, the mate marks on their skin, the ones that had once been a source of such terror for her, pulsed with a soft, warm, golden light, a gentle echo of the love that now freely flowed between them. The moonstone amulet around her neck hummed in response, and a tiny, almost invisible fissure that had appeared on its surface after her great expenditure of power against Alara seemed to seal itself, its inner light glowing stronger, clearer, more serene than ever before. A balance restored, indeed. A year later, Sage stood beside Noah on that same ridge overlooking their valley, now truly their valley. ShadowCreek thrived, a testament to resilience, to unity, to the quiet, strong leadership of its alpha and his sovereign Luna. Spring had breathed new life into the land, painting the hills in vibrant greens and wildflowers. She leaned her head against his shoulder, his arm a familiar, comforting weight around her. The fear was gone, replaced by a deep, abiding peace, a sense of belonging she'd never dreamed possible. Her powers, once a source of terror, were now a gentle current within her, a tool for healing, for understanding, for protecting those she loved. She was no longer just Sage, the broken survivor, or Sage, the unwilling sovereign. She was Sage, mate to Noah, Luna of ShadowCreek, a woman who had found her strength, her purpose, and her heart's truest home. Looking back on it all, she thought, her gaze lifting to the benevolent face of the full moon hanging like a pearl in the indigo sky, it was a terrifying, impossible journey. But every scar, every tear, it led me here. To him. To this. Noah kissed the top of her head. What are you thinking about, my love? She smiled, a genuine, untroubled smile. Just how sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the most beautiful destinations. He chuckled, a warm, happy sound, and pulled her closer. As they stood there, bathed in moonlight, content in their hard-won fairy tale, Sage felt a faint, almost imperceptible nudge against her ankle. She glanced down. A small, silver-furred kit, not quite a wolf, not quite a fox, with eyes like chips of the twilight sky, looked up at her, then gave a playful yip before darting into the shadows, only to peek back out again, as if inviting her to a new, gentle adventure. Her world, she realized with a soft laugh that Noah joined, was still full of magic, but now, it was a magic filled with promise, not peril. And with Noah by her side, she knew she could face anything.